Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 2nd of August, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today by video link, we have Mark Anderson from the United States and Debi Evans. Welcome to the programme, both. Now, we're going to get started off with Keir Starmer's announcement yesterday of a new aspect of policing in the UK that follows on from the violence that there's been on the streets over the last few days. Let's have a listen to this.
A gang of thugs got on trains and buses, went to a community that is not their own, a community grieving the most horrific tragedy, and then proceeded to throw bricks at police officers who just 24 hours earlier had been having to deal with an attack on children in their community. And let me be clear, the meeting this afternoon was not about pointing the finger of blame. That is not how this government of service conducts its business, because it doesn't work. Rather, this was a meeting to pull together our response, a response both to the immediate challenge, which is clearly driven by far-right hatred, but also all violent disorder that flares up, whatever the apparent cause or motivation. We make no distinction. Crime is crime, and so to that end, I can announce today that following this meeting, we will establish a national capability across police forces to tackle violent disorder. These thugs are mobile, they move from community to community, and we must have a policing response that can do the same.
So a new policing response to deal with this kind of violent behaviour. They're talking about local insight and data being used to gain a national understanding of where these criminals are operating, including the British Transport Police alerting when they see a spike in train ticket sales that could be linked to organised violent disorder. They're talking about it, considering how we can deploy facial recognition technology, which is already used by some forces more widely across the country. This will mean criminals can be targeted, found and brought to justice quickly. Now, a lot of people were unhappy with what was presented by Charles on Wednesday's programme, and perhaps what I'm about to present isn't going to make you any happier, because we've got to ask ourselves some serious questions here. The government has responded in this way to what has happened over the last couple of days, or at least this is their claim. They're claiming that this is a response, a direct response to what has happened over the last couple of days. I would suggest to you that actually this is something which has been building up for much, much longer. If we go back to 2017, the UK column was reporting this is Sajid Javid, and he was saying at that time, ISIS and right-wing extremists both exploit grievances, distort the truth, and undermine the values that hold us together. And this perhaps might seem ironic in some ways, that the UK government of the day was attempting to conflate ISIS terrorists with far-right extremists. This was 2017 or so. We were starting to see this narrative of the rise of far-right extremists starting to build in the mainstream political and media narrative. But if we bring him back on screen again and then move to Nick Basu, who was at that time the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Assistant Commissioner, he said, "I'm worried that the radicalisation of some of the most vulnerable people in our society, namely our children, is happening both from the Islamist and extreme right-wing ideologies." And again, we're seeing the same narrative, this conflation of left and right, or perception of left and right. Terrorism in the West, said the Henry Jackson Society, an age of extremes, a new pattern of far-right offenders emulating or copying the tactics of high-profile Islamist assailants. And we start to see this narrative being built. It's not organic, it's not happening, it's not grassroots, it's being created by the state. We start to see in the Times, Tory turmoil could lead to a far-right revival. the overt message here. If we look at the text, the return to dominance of the two main parties, which saw Labour and the Conservatives share around 80% of the vote, was one of the most surprising consequences of the referendum 2 years ago. It left many in the centre ground pining for a new party. So this is from 2018, and they're talking about a new extreme right-wing party appearing. And of course, that's exactly what has happened. The Reform Party has appeared. It's mainstream, it's right-wing. It has taken over a certain amount of the narrative from the Conservative Party. And my question is, was that something which happened organically, or was that something that was arranged? In the meantime, we started to see the propaganda. So apps coming out from various police forces around the country cross the line. How far would you go? This was targeted at the young, all designed to, in inverted commas, prevent the rise of right-wing extremism, when in fact what it was intended to do was the exact opposite. We started to be bombarded with mainstream media headlines. Boris Johnson being spineless about not dealing with the burqa row at the time. The Daily Telegraph, Johnson refuses to back down on burqas. In the meantime, we have burgeoning immigration and the collapse of our infrastructure, putting more pressure on people. The NHS is collapsing, leading medic warns. Thames Water, Sunak and Starmer will both be dreading the most likely option for utility at risk of collapse, and this is right across the country. Other headlines: how do we tackle the UK's housing crisis? So at the same time that they're pumping up migration, and let's just remind ourselves of this graph, 1.2 million people coming into the country in 2023 and 500,000 people leaving the country in 2023. So significant net migration, putting pressure on while the government is allowing infrastructure to collapse. This, of course, puts people in a state of stress, and they start looking for leaders. And the question then is, what kind of leaders do they migrate to? Well, let's bring one of them on screen.
When you see these communities and you see these houses, you think this is a British community, or you might have British Muslims. They are enemy combatants in these houses. In these houses are enemy combatants who want to kill you, maim you, and destroy you. They want to destroy our way of life.
Now, that's not a peaceful narrative there. This is absolute clash of civilizations narrative that was being pushed out. And who is behind the clash of civilizations ideology? You need to look into that. When we start looking at other leaders, let's look at Tommy Robinson Light. So here's Starmer standing in front of his double cross there. And this morning, who did we have also in front of his double cross? Virtue signaling. What's he telling us here? I'm going to suggest that we are being played. And when we're looking as members of society and citizens and whatnot for people to lead, we've got to be careful about who it is that we are asking to lead. Now, the next point, here's the Metro from a few years ago. London police take the knee with Black Lives Matter protests. Does anybody think that this was by accident? What was this designed to do? It was designed to enrage a certain part of the population. In fact, I'm going to suggest it was designed to radicalize a certain part of the population and drive people towards a right-wing extreme. This is building the right-wing extreme, in my opinion, right? Then over the last couple of days, we've seen this as the Palestine protests have seen other influences begin to move in. Now, Brian and I visited, and Ben as well visited, the Palestine protests some months ago, and we found it to be extremely peaceful, extremely decent people in general. But now we're starting to see this. And if we just zoom in on the flag on the left here, well, first of all, Alan Miller saying ISIS and Hamas flags. Well, let's look at the ISIS flag on the left. This, in fact, is not an ISIS flag. It's an Al-Qaeda flag. But we've got somebody who's masked up there with a red bandana and carrying the flag. Who is this person? What's he doing there? Is he a genuine pro-Palestine protester? I would suggest he is not, because if we look at where that flag comes from, this is the Syrian Revolution Memory Project. And of course, this is the terrorist groups that the British government funded in Syria, the anti-Assad terrorist groups that the British government funded in Syria, now on the streets of Britain, in amongst people protesting what's going on in Gaza. But these people were funded by the British state in Syria And these people have made death threats against Vanessa Beeley, amongst others. So these are not good people. They're not. And my question, therefore, is what are they doing amongst this protest? Are they there to wind up a certain section of the society? And I would just make the point that if we remember this piece of legislation, which is now an act of Parliament, the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Bill, and we have to ask ourselves, if we are living in a regime where the government is prepared to say that an agent of the state is able to commit breaches of the law, is able to break the law, then to what degree does that end? Where does that end? There's no limitation on these covert intelligence sources, the kinds of laws that they can break. So would it be beyond the British government to be running a psychological operation on us? Let's not forget this lady, Juliet Harkin, formerly BBC Media Action, talking about their efforts to bring opposition onto the streets in Syria. Again, is this the kind of thing that we would not also see in this country? And let me remind you about the integrated operating concept, which is Ministry of Defence doctrine in the UK, making it very clear that the enemy is not just abroad, it's also at home. We are being played. So I'm going to say that if we're going to focus on the enemy as being this lot on the left, we are looking at a symptom, and that is the wrong target. We need to be focusing on the enemy on the right, because this is the disease that is bringing people into the country in the numbers that they're coming into, and there are a number of voices in this country that are operating on behalf of the problem on the right there, because the people that are reacting to those people in the way that they are giving Keir Starmer and his state infrastructure the go-ahead, therefore, to bring in more and more draconian rules, which is supposed to be what we're fighting against in the first place. I'm starting to see things like this on X. The lion had a little growl yesterday. Wait till it effing roars. If the lion roars in a violent way, we are playing into the hands of the state. There are other ways to deal with this. For example, stop funding the state. That might be a place to start. That's a peaceful action that can be taken. Stop funding the state, and they will get the state's attention very quickly. There is no need to go around destroying our own communities in frustration at what's going on around us. And I completely understand and get the frustration, and I understand why the narrative that Tommy Robinson and people like that would put forward would be attractive to people. But I strongly urge that we consider what is happening here and how we are being played. And that's my thoughts on this. Debbie, have you got any comments? Do you disagree with me? I'm quite happy if people disagree with me. You can fight me in the comments and in the chat box and in the forums and on YouTube and so on. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And no, I agree with you, Mike. And I think that this is a deliberate attempt by Keir Starmer to disrupt the British public, to make them angry. Of course, they're angry. Of course, the British public are angry. But he wants us to be angry. He wants division. He wants any excuse to come down hard. And we said that change was going to be happening. And he's only been in government 4 weeks. And I'd say already we're starting to see that. And isn't he the Prime Minister that wants to let out loads of prisoners out of prison early? Is that to disrupt, perhaps?
Very good question. What happens when we start? Well, we can talk about that more in extra. But Debbie, let's move on then to Summit of the Future. Now, this is something that you've talked about and I've talked about in the past, but many people aren't even aware of it. This perhaps is even more egregious than the World Health Organization and their efforts at undermining state sovereignty.
Yes, it really, really is. And happy holidays to everybody. If you're out and about enjoying the fine weather, because behind the scenes, there's plenty going on, and Parliament's out, school's out. Everybody's maybe on holiday watching the Olympics, but what is going on behind the scenes? And even actually in February, on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, I was talking about the Summit for the Future, and I was warning about it. And I want to revisit it now, because we'll be looking at two words in particular, your two new buzzwords, which will be peace and security, but that really doesn't mean what it says. So let's remind ourselves that the Great Reset started with Prince Charles back in 2021 when he announced it at the World Economic Forum. So this was, in my opinion, the first phase of the Great Reset. And I've been looking at all of these summits and I thought, well, actually, what does the word summit mean? So this is what the word summit means. It means the highest point, i.e., somewhere like Everest, the topmost level attainable, the highest level of officials, a conference of highest level officials, such as heads of government. So we know that this is a high level meeting. So I went to the Council of Councils, and ironically, the Council of Councils is actually it's been created by the Council on Foreign Relations. What a surprise. But it's a think tank and it serves to facilitate dialogue between 27 major policy institutes from the world's most influential countries. And it publishes a nice handy guide as to the global summits we should be looking out for. So here's the guide. If you want to go online and look for the guide, you can see, I think that's it, global summits to watch in 2024. So which ones do we need to watch in 2024? We've already had a few of which we've discussed earlier on in the year, but these are the ones I want to focus on in particular. So in September, we've got the Summit of the Future. In October, we've got BRICS, and that's going to be chaired by Russia in October. And we've got the World Health Summit, which we'll come on to later in the news. And in November, we've got COP29 and G20. So we've got a very busy 8 weeks of high-level meetings and decision makers. So let's start at September 2024, because the Summit for the Future is really important. And they've already called to arms, urgent call to countries to accelerate the delivery of the sustainable goals. Well, I call them unsustainable, quite frankly. But why? Why are they in such a rush? Well, they're blaming conflicts like Ukraine and Israel for a delay. And so now they've only reached 17% of their goals. So they're falling short big time. So I thought I'd go to the World Economic Forum, like you do, to check what they're saying. And they seem to be referring to the Summit of the Future. And thank you to the person on Twitter who said to me, oh, no, you're using Jonathan Van Tam's analogy. No, I promise you I'm not. I'm using the World Economic Forum, who refer to the Summit of the Future as a football match. And they reckon now that they need to go back to the locker room. They need to re-strategize because the game is going to be lost or won in the second half. And they stress the importance of this summit. But what's it all about? Because they call it multilateralism. That's the name that they actually call it. But in my terms, this means global governance. So I've got a little short video just to explain. Have a look at this.
Is the multilateralism we have today capable of managing the global challenges we're experiencing?
Welcome to the UN Library and Archives Geneva. We're here at the Commons, our space for sharing knowledge and debating questions on multilateralism. This is the journey to the Summit of the Future. In the lead up to this unique UN meeting in 2024, we're exploring with experts the questions we should be asking to ensure effective and inclusive multilateralism for today and for the future.
In his report, Our Common Agenda, the UN Secretary General called for the Summit of the Future as a critical moment for members of the UN to consider how to build more effective global governance capable of dealing with today's challenges and those to come. The summit is expected to create a new pact for the future and revive global solidarity for current and future generations.
So through this playlist, we're talking with experts and practitioners in the lead up to the summit.
And these conversations explore the ideas raised in the Secretary General's policy briefs, as well as the proposals from the report of the High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism.
What kind of multilateralism do we need for our future?
So let's return to the United Nations themselves and look at the next chapter. So they have now published the next chapter where they're predicting that 80% of the world's young people will all live in Africa and Asia by 2100. So that's a pretty big ambition. But what are their key messages? Their key messages are to prioritise young people, to let the young lead the way. That's if they're not bumping into lampposts absorbed by their phones, I should add. They want you to act now for the future, to ditch the pessimism, embrace the courage. It's all about sustainable goals that, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, that are unsustainable. And it's very generation centric, cover all generations. But what's the pact for the future? Because, you know, the pact for the future is a pact. So I looked very closely at it, and it seems to be a global call to action for peace and security. So peace in my language means your silence and censorship, and security means their security. And we get tracked and traced. But it's looking at the sustainable goals, financing for development. It's looking at tech innovation, digital cooperation, the youth again. And we've got two annexes there: the Global Compact Declaration and the Declaration of Future Generations. I'll come on to that in a minute. But we've also got an engine room for the young. So we've got an engine room youth survey where it would appear that the young are quite happy to be taxed on luxury items for the good of the planet. So, you know, you can't have a plane ticket without extra tax because that goes to the planet. They want to create a platform for young dreamers, and you can be a guardian of tomorrow. And apparently Wales have already got a commissioner for future generations. But they've got three more aims as well. And their three aims are Global Digital Compact, which is basically military applications of artificial intelligence. They want a special envoy for future generations and an emergency platform which really covers all bases and puts all member states into lockstep, depending on whether it's a health emergency, whether it's a cyber emergency, whatever it is. But what's the future beyond 2024? They've got a little roadmap, and here's the little roadmap. So we're looking at Beijing 30, the World Social Summit, that's a news of its own, COP30, and the 2027 SDG Summit, which is going to be the last checkpoint between the 2030 agenda. So that's why they are in a rush. And I've got one little bit more video very quickly to show you, which is about the Summit of the Future.
The Summit of the Future is about how we cooperate at the global level to solve our biggest shared problems. And that includes the problem of not having implemented and not having reached some of the goals that we've already agreed, including the Sustainable Development Goals, the principles of the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and so many other goals and agreements that we've already reached that would really deliver the future we want. But it's also about how we cooperate to address the new opportunities, fast developing digital technology such as AI, and how we minimize the risks of some of those developments. It's about how we solve problems at the global level, how we work together, and how we deliver a future that is fairer, more sustainable, and better for all of humanity, and not just the few who benefit these days from these developments.
So this is a big summit with a big agenda that will mean big changes for us all. And the next few slides, I'm just going to ask you all to go to the website and freeze the screen if necessary, because there's a lot of detail. So I just want to illustrate what they're doing. So this is the Summit of the Future website to be held 20th to 23rd of September over the equinox, as Stephanie very kindly reminded me. It's been presented as a once in a lifetime, a generation opportunity to mend trust. And there's a lovely picture of a mural there. I thought Ben might like to do a little bit more research in. It's the Eduardo Cobra mural, and it's got lots of symbology. So here's the provisional program, and I just ask you to freeze the screen. So here we have Sunday's program, and we can see they're talking about peace and security. And here we go, not acceleration anymore, we're turbocharging. And they use the word turbocharging all the time, turbocharging the 2030 agenda. Here's the Monday provisional program, and you can see the future starts now and common digital future. And then I'll just show you some screenshots of the Pact for the Future, which is a declaration. And please look out for the Pact of the Future, because that's going to have many more details in it. And you can see the actions on the next slide. I've highlighted. I'm not going to read them all out, but please go and have a look, because this is what is heading our way, turbocharging again. And in an area of peace and security, there's a whole chapter designed to that, to make us feel safe, but they're looking at new forms of conflict. And here are the declarations themselves. So we've got the Future Generations Declaration first. Secondly, we've got the Draft Digital Compact declaration, which means basically that digitization will transform the world. And of course, finally, just to end up, the UK, we are fully in support of it, multilateralism, and we're really looking forward to the Summit of the Future. And to anybody that wants to read a little bit more about the United Nations, I thoroughly recommend Joan Vion's The United Nations Global Straitjacket.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you very much for that. Now, Mark, let's welcome you to the programme. And if Debbie's talking about what the United Nations is doing and with their summits, there have been other summits taking place as well.
Indeed, Mike. Good day, everyone. Yeah, the Sovereignty Summit 2 took place this past Monday. I was able to cover just part of it, so I took some original photos via screenshot. This is Frank Gaffney, the co-founder of the Sovereignty Coalition and executive chairman of the Center for Security Policy. And they have a pretty solid outlook in terms of being on the lookout for the avian or bird flu, H5N1, whatever is going to become the next pandemic. They're getting out all the legal guns they can, all the intellectual arguments they can, trying to reinforce U.S. sovereignty for the next pandemic. So they seem to be very proactive, which is reassuring to a point. Now, here we show Representative Ralph Norman, a congressman, a Republican out of South Carolina. And the part I covered mainly had to do with a bill that's languishing a bit. House Resolution 1425 would authorize the U.S. Senate to treat both the WHO pandemic treaty and the associated international health regulations, both as treaties. The problem thus far is that the bill has been dormant, parked in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, but it does have 59 co-sponsors, which is somewhat helpful the way Congress operates. And we'll go on from there. I wrote some news briefs from this event. The bill is called the No WHO Pandemic Preparedness Treaty Without Senate Approval Act. A bit wordy, but there it is. According to the Library of Congress, which is congress.gov, it, quote, establishes that any convention or agreement on pandemic-related issues reached by the WHO's World Health Assembly pursuant to a specified negotiating body shall be deemed to be a treaty requiring the advice and consent of the Senate. Constitutionally, that means a two-thirds supermajority of those present, that's a caveat, would be needed in the Senate to approve U.S. entry into such WHO treaties. And we can keep moving. Another more, a little bit more text from my news brief. Representative Norman and the sovereignty senators, Mr. Gaffney, agree that such a measure should be pursued to secure the principle that the U.S. must not fail to exercise its sovereign treaty powers via the Senate, lest the nation become mired in new draconian health edicts that blindsides the citizenry in the same way that the citizenry, don't we all remember it, was blindsided by fear-infused COVID-19 edicts back in 2020. Of course, that kind of traipsed into 2021 a bit. And there's more points of interest here as we go along. I may not read all of this, but I got this right out of the text of H.R. 1425 via congress.gov, the Library of Congress. Maybe some of us have forgotten this. Back on May 18th of 2020, then President Trump sent a letter to the WHO, sent it to Tedros, the Director General there, and he made a couple of points. The U.S. contributions to the WHO would be halted due to the WHO's mismanagement of the COVID-19 outbreak and the lack of independence from the People's Republic of China, that is the WHO's lack of independence, and B, the U.S. would evidently or supposedly withdraw from the WHO if the WHO did not commit to substantive improvements within 30 days. There was another point there. President Trump's May 18 letter cited numerous instances of WHO mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that included repeated grossly inaccurate or misleading claims about the transmissibility of the virus and about the government of China's alleged handling of the outbreak. Of course, that's a little bit of a nebulous part of this. but that's right in the bill. So it's a pretty detailed bill that gets into some pretty controversial points, and we'll continue from there. And this is another aspect that I was able to cover that past Monday. Another aspect of it is came from Matt Staver, the Liberty Counsel, and he spoke. That's a separate organization that operates a lot or participates a lot with the Sovereignty Coalition, the Liberty Counsel. And he talked about a lawsuit, the South Bay Pentecostal Church versus Newsom, and an associated suit was Harvest Rock Church versus Newsom, Newsom being Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. And Mr. Staver talked about the decision date. He went back in history a little bit, February 5th, 2021, and the deciding court was the U.S. Supreme Court. For months, California permitted Hollywood film studios and large retailers to open their doors, but the Golden State cracked down on houses of worship, preventing them from opening their doors to even a single worshiper. Recognizing this unequal treatment, South Bay United Pentecostal Church and Harvest Rock Church sued California, asking that religious worship be treated at least as well as these secular activities. And there was a comparable case involving a Roman Catholic diocese versus Cuomo. So in this aspect of the Sovereignty Coalition program, Mike, they're talking about the Liberty Counsel being among the organizations that would be very vigilant and battling any further attempts, if there's another pandemic declaration, to shut down on houses of worship. So all in all, the part that I saw seemed to be an indication that there's some pretty vigilant voices out there that are waiting in the wings for any move by Tedros and the WHO as they solidify the pandemic treaty and put whatever final touches they might do on the international health regulations, very vigilant toward any new pandemic and what that crackdown may consist of. So there'll be, I'm trying to get a hold of the video from that program so I can watch more of the participants, including the well-known Dr. Peter McCullough. And next week, I presume I'll have a little bit more on this to see how that overall event rounded out and what they have in store in terms of preventing the worst effects of another pandemic should it be declared.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Mark. Right. If you like what the UK column does, you would like to support us, then please have a look at support.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us there. We do need your support. It's £5 a month if you want to be a member. Of course, that gives you access to UK Column News Extra, which we will be on straight after this news program. If you would like to share our material, we would very much appreciate that as well. Of course, we are increasingly censored, and you can act as the algorithm for us. So ukcolumn.org and UK Column Extracts are the place to go for that. You can pick something up at the UK Column shop. And thank you very much again to everybody that is either a member or has picked up a copy of Your Life in Their Hands. There's still copies available if you would like to get hold of one. If you haven't got it yet, please do so. Debbie, your blog will be up this afternoon. What do we get to look forward to this week?
Well, you get my observations on Paris 2024 opening ceremony. Maybe there's some things in there that perhaps you haven't noticed. And who's heard of SIPRI, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute? Perhaps maybe a new segment coming up on that. And also, dementia cases expected to almost triple across the world by 2050. I wonder why that could be. So that and plenty more.
Okay, thank you. A reminder of the Gutsy Women interview between Brian and Natasha McCallum. That's on the website. It went out at 1 p.m. yesterday, of course, but it is up on the website now. So if you haven't seen that yet, do have a look. This was looking at the inside of Fernethi House. And everybody should be aware of that particular campaign that's ongoing at the moment to get the women that were apparently abused in Fernethi House some justice. Finally, now I just mention the October event, 19th of October 2024. The tickets are on sale now at the UK Column shop. We hope to see as many of you there as possible. Please pick up your ticket. They're on sale at an early bird price at the moment. Please have a look and decide if you want to come. We look forward to meeting everybody that's there. Now, let's have a look at the war situation at the moment. And well, you'd be impressed to know that Ukraine has taken delivery of its first F-16s, allegedly. Lots of mainstream media talking about this at the moment, but mostly relying on unnamed sources. We're not clear at this point whether any of them will actually take to the air while they're in Ukrainian airspace, or who will be piloting them, in fact, because, of course, the Ukrainians don't have anybody that can fly them at this stage and won't have for quite some time. But in the meantime, this article, this is an opinion piece in the New York Times. Only a strong US no to Israel will stop war in Lebanon. In fact, the print version of this uses the word total, so we'll stop total war in Lebanon. In fact, total regional war is what this is talking about. So if we just have a look at what they're saying here, if Israel goes further and launches a major operation to uproot Hezbollah, which right-wing members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's government have been urging, it would be devastating. And they're talking about economic collapse, humanitarian crisis, and the increasing likelihood of attacks in Syria, in Iraq, Yemen, and so on. So the broadening of the conflict. None of this is in the United States' interest, says this op-ed, while making clear that it would continue to defend Israel against direct attacks by Iran, Hezbollah's patron. Washington needs to make clear to Israel that it will not sanction such a war or facilitate it by supplying munitions, joining the Israeli military in attacks against Hezbollah, or providing diplomatic cover for the deaths of civilians. So if that is the position of the opinion piece in the New York Times, that the US should be absolutely pushing against Israel on this, I wonder what the opinion of the new, or the potential new vice president is, because Mark was talking about JD Vance last week. Let's just have a listen to this. This is from the Cato Institute a couple of months ago when he was speaking.
There's another reason, actually, motivated by my view that America can't do everything. We have to sort of ask ourselves, what do we want out of our Israeli allies? And more importantly, what do we want out of all of our allies writ large? Do we want clients who depend on us, who can't do anything without us? Or do we want real allies who can actually advance their interests? So my biggest criticism of our approach in Ukraine is that it has no strategic end in sight, and it's not leading anywhere that's going to ultimately be good for our country. We are subsidizing the Europeans to do nothing. The Europeans are not carrying their fair share of the burden, especially when it comes in provision of weapons, and they're deindustrializing their own country at the same time that they say that Putin must be defeated at all costs. But I actually think that Washington, at least current Washington leadership, really likes the fact that the Europeans are completely dependent on us. That's not an alliance. These people aren't increasingly allies. They are client states of the United States of America who do whatever we want them to do. Well, I think we have a real opportunity to ensure that Israel is an ally in the true sense, that it's going to pursue their interests, and sometimes those interests won't totally overlap with the United States, and that's totally reasonable, but they are fundamentally self-sufficient. And I think the way that we get there in Israel is actually by combining the Abraham Accords approach with the defeat of Hamas that gets us to a place where Israel and the Sunni nations can play a regional counterweight to Iran. Again, we don't want a broader regional war. We don't want to get involved in a broader regional war. The best way to do that is to ensure that Israel with the Sunni nations can actually police their own region of the world. And that allows us to spend less time and less resources on the Middle East and focus more on East Asia. In the same way that we want our own allies to do the job in Europe so that we can focus on East Asia, I think that the same is true of the Sunni nations in Israel and the Middle East. We want to focus more on East Asia.
So that should be absolutely clear to everybody. And actually, this narrative is pretty much what Trump was pushing while he was president. If you remember him attending the inauguration of the new NATO headquarters in Brussels in 2018 or so, and he was talking about the fact that that Europe was not paying its way and so on. But so what JD Vance is saying there very, very clearly is that the United States wants Europe to deal with Putin, wants Israel to deal with Iran, so that it can deal with China. He was very clear there he wasn't saying that they didn't want a regional war in the Middle East. He was saying they don't want to be involved in the regional war in the Middle East because they want to focus on Asia right? So I think that is pretty clear what he's saying. This is what the Trump presidency, should he become president, is going to represent. Mark, very briefly, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, briefly, Mike. I like what I hear for the most part. I'm hearing a increasingly non-interventionist, what used to be insulted as a isolationist stance, but a non-interventionist stance, at least to a reasonable degree. And I like his distinction between client and an ally. A real ally can stand on their own 2 feet, love them or hate them, but a client or less than that is an overly dependent other nation that is going to go the wrong way and then increasingly lean on the U.S. taxpayers. So compared to past administrations, Mr. Vance is sounding pretty promising on a scale of 1 to 5, with a 5 being pretty good. I give him at least a 3.5, maybe a 4 at this point.
Right. Well, we can talk about this more in extra, but I'm going to say I completely disagree with you on that. But we'll talk about more on that in extra. In the meantime, what's going on in Russia, or with Russia and Africa?
Oh yes, the Valdez Discussion Club. They don't get a lot of press. I don't know in terms of the alternative media. I don't know, Mike, if UK column over a longer period. I've been on board most recently about 2 years. I don't know if you've given much to the Valdez Discussion Club, but this is sort of an overview, kind of a straightforward report for today. The Russia-Africa cooperation outlook and objectives. They've had a lot of meetings lately, most recently in latter July. And it has to do with BRICS. BRICS is involved in this, but we'll move on and just kind of do an overview of what's been going on. Another news brief I wrote for today's report: the 10 BRICS nations' political and business affairs. BRICS calls itself an intergovernmental organization and includes Brazil, Russia, China, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, are often worked out at the Valdez Discussion Club, a Moscow-based think tank and discussion forum frequented by Russian President Vladimir Putin. On March 18th of this year, the Valdez Club hosted an expert discussion dedicated to the financial settlements of the BRICS countries. But then the club went on to hold a major conference, the first one on African soil, in Tanzania on July 24 this year. That event's development was significantly influenced by the expansion of BRICS this year, which, in addition to South Africa, added also Egypt and Ethiopia. Thus, key African countries are receiving additional representation in the BRIC structure that determines what are called, quote, the general principles of the countries of the global non-West and South regarding world politics and economics, as organizers of the July 24th event explained, adding that the conference considered the following topics, and we have a few bullet points: economic cooperation between Russia and African countries and their shared values. I'm not sure exactly what those values are at this point. The role of media in their promotion and cultural cooperation. I would wonder which media and in what way. The approaches of the participating countries, quote, to the problem of climate change in connection with the social agenda. And it's not altogether clear what their view is on climate change. Is it markedly different than the US-led unipolar world? And tasks for combating world poverty and inequality. I'd like to think that would include serious monetary reform, but we don't know yet. And this is the ambassador of Russia to Tanzania, Mr. Andrei Avetesyan. Avetesyan. I'm kind of, maybe I need Alex here. This is what he had to say. Global politics, the economy, and technological competition will never be the same as before. More countries are striving to strengthen their sovereignty, their self-sufficiency, national and cultural identity. The countries of the global South and East are gaining prominence. And I believe we have one more quote from this gentleman. This new political and economic reality now serve as the foundation for the emerging multipolar and multilateral world order. And this is an inevitable process, he claims. It reflects the cultural and civilizational diversity that is inherently part of humanity, despite all attempts at artificial unification. So he's implying that what the West does through its global governance efforts is in some way artificial. Perhaps he's correct on that. And this is an associated report by the Valdez Discussion Club, Russia, Africa Cooperation, Outlook and Objectives, and just some of the contents. Readers can get into the screens there. to the screen there and freeze that to see the contents. And this is part of those contents. I highlighted a key part. I'll read the top paragraph, only half. Russia-Africa relations have become more substantive and regular over the past year, with development strategies, plans, roadmaps, and summit meetings that have become regular despite the challenges and plans for annual Russia-Africa ministerial conferences. And then the highlighted part, a system of Russian-African relations is gradually taking shape from chaos, dissonance, and competing initiatives. Political signals are increasingly often complemented with practical efforts in various spheres. However, there is still room for a closer alignment of Russia's political and economic interests in the region, considering that political dialogue with some countries is developing more actively than economic cooperation is. So some of it's a little dry, but they're obviously trying to make a pretty big stride forward here, Mike, in their version of a world order that is more multipolar. They claim the U.S.-led part is, of course, unipolar and artificial and is prone to a lot of manipulation. Some might argue that this is just another dialectic to kind of merge East and West together, and it will bring just another form of global governance that we'll find just as equally objectionable as we find the Western-led version. I don't know that it's a deceptive thing like that. That's an argument I've heard. But that's the latest. There'll be more from this group as I sort this out and probably get into that report a little more, perhaps next week or the week after. So with that, I think we're good for today for now.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thanks for that. Debi, let's come back to you then, and back on the topic of health and world health.
Yes. But before I talk about World Health, I just want to add that the MHRA have put the May and July board meeting on YouTube. Please, everybody go and click on it, because we really need them to know that we're watching. And it would appear that Dame June is still there, but we'll hold off on that for now. But yeah, back to future health. And, it's all about the future of Britain, Tony Blair, the future health, the summit of the future. And we're looking at October, and I'm going into October and I'm seeing what's going on. Well, we've got BRICS to start off with, the BRICS summit, which I said was going to be chaired by Russia. So that's on the 22nd to 24th of October. But just before then, because I do think these 8 weeks between September and the end of November are going to be pivotal, and we're going to start seeing a tightening of screws on us. So the World Health Summit, 13th, 15th of October in Berlin, meant to be building trust for a healthier world. And we've got a huge 350 speakers, and I'll show you some of those in a minute, 3,000 participants, over 60 sessions, and they're going to be looking at women's health, antimicrobial resistance, health around climate shocks, which pretty much includes everything, including vaccines, digital health, of course, artificial intelligence, and again, youth leaders of the future. And just to take you to the website for the future health so you can see where to go. This is the main front page of the website, Building Trust for a Healthier World. But if we go to look at their mission, we can see that, again, they call this a unique platform for global health. I think that's on the next slide. Yeah, it's a unique platform where stakeholders, politicians, scientists, the private sector, and civil society can all meet to talk about the sustainable development goals. And this is, they say, political decisions will affect human health, and quite clearly they are wanting to accelerate everything. But if we look at the central topics are, again, we say antimicrobial resistance, artificial intelligence, the youth, again, young people, women's health, climate, and how climate will affect health. And I just want you to see their program, because they brought out a draft program, and this has only just been published. So you can freeze the screen again, because there's so much on that you might want to choose a particular session to go and watch, because I do think that this is going to be vital. So this is for October the 3rd. And just freeze the screen so you can see the agenda. And then we've also got the 14th and the 15th. So you can see the agendas for both of those days. And who's running it? Well, we've got a gentleman called Axel Priest, who's the World Health Summit president. And I'm just going to highlight a number of the members, not so much by name, but by organisation. So we've got the United Nations participating, the Red Cross, Google Health, Wellcome, the WHO, of course, Bill and Melinda Gates as well, the usual suspects. And what about their partners? Well, you won't be surprised to see Bill and Melinda Gates or Pfizer, CEPI, the European Commission and Siemens, the major partners, premier partners. We've got the Rockefeller Foundation, we've got Bayer, Johnson & Johnson. I mean, it really is a feast for your eyes of all of the names that you're used to. Supporting partners, there you go. You've got the Global Fund. I mean, it's extraordinarily big event, and it's going to be taking place, as I say, in October. But let's look at some of the speakers, because they've got so many speakers. So of course we've got Tedros from the WHO. We've also got the ambassador on antimicrobial resistance for Federal Ministry of Health, Germany, and also the CEO of the Union of International Cancer Control. So these are the three big agendas here that the WHO are going to be looking at. But let's look at a few more of the speakers, and I'm just going to highlight just a few, because there really are so many. So we're looking at speakers from Google, DeepMind, and there we see Dame Sally Davis. Of course, she's our very own UK envoy for antimicrobial resistance. We've got UNAIDS, we've got the Max Planck, we've got Bill Gates. I mean, the names go on. And if we go on to the next slide, you'll see some more familiar faces. Jeremy Farrar, who's the chief scientist for the WHO. Richard Horton, editor of The Lancet. We've got YouTube being represented, and we've got epidemic preparedness being represented. And even more on the next slide, we've got Gavi, we've got Wellcome, we've got the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Pfizer, the Rockefellers, the lists just go on and on. A big, big summit. But I mean, let's look at the next slide, because we're looking at the United Nations political declaration. Now, this is the one that I've been talking about. This is one of the days where purely antimicrobial resistance is going to be talked about. And this is why I say this is going to be a big agenda moving forward. So what they're saying is that it contributes to 5 million deaths a year, including many children. The financial costs are extreme, $1 trillion for additional healthcare. But they say that treating antibiotic resistance infection could cost a staggering, eye-watering £412 billion a year, and with lost productivity of $443 billion a year. So, I mean, they're putting big figures on this. And as I've said all along, antimicrobial resistance, how real is this agenda? Probably, in my opinion, about as real as climate change and all of these sustainable goals that appear unsustainable. So here's the big banner for antimicrobial resistance. AMR is invisible. I am not. Well, it's going to be a big day, and I predict big changes. But let's go on to November, because I did say the 8 weeks were going to be busy. And I'm just going to flash up a couple of big dates for your diary. The UN climate change in November, the conference in Baku, 11th to the 22nd of November 2024. And then we've got the G20 as well in Rio. That's on November the 18th to the 19th. That's going to be another huge summit. And of course, in December, we just round it all off with Epidemic Preparedness Day. So as far as I can see from what I'm looking at online, it would appear that the weeks between the end of September to the end of November are going to be extremely busy. There are going to be a lot of major decisions made that could affect us very, very quickly. And like I say, we're going from the word acceleration to turbocharged. So keep an eye. When we all get back from holiday and the kids go back to school, I think we're going to see a lot of changes very quickly.
Okay, Debbie, thank you very much. Well, we're just going to finish with farming. And well, the government was pushing this out this morning. This is from DEFRA. we're introducing a new deal for farmers. So they've announced their commitment to introduce a new deal for farmers to address low confidence and provide stability to the farming sector. So this is what they have to say: optimizing environmental land management schemes so that they can produce the right outcomes for all farmers, including those who've been too often ignored, such as small grassland, upland and tenant farmers, while delivering food security and nature recovery in a just and equitable way. So they're claiming to maintain food security. And my question is, are they going to do any such thing? Now, Harry Metcalf is a farmer in the UK who has a YouTube channel called Harry's Farm. And he released a video yesterday commenting on the issue of environmental land management and food security. Let's have a listen to this.
We have a consumption of oilseed rape in the UK of around 1.8 million tonnes. They think the 24 harvest is going to be about 900 tonnes. You don't have to go back. You go back to 2012, we were exporting 700,000 tonnes. So we're growing 2-point-something million tonnes of rape. 2024, we're down to 900,000 tonnes. And just going on a perception and chatter amongst farmers, that might go down to 600,000 tonnes next year. It's just decimated the tonnage of oilseed rape being grown in this country, food if you like. And with all these environmental things happening as well, the wheat tonnage is going down. I don't know what's going to happen in harvest 25 when reality hits, when the actual amount of food produced in this country has dropped so dramatically. We're not talking about 10%, we're talking about half the amount. I mean, huge numbers. And I notice also stock numbers on the upland farms, the reports just being published, they're massively down. So they dropped 600-something thousand head of sheep this year, just in 1 year alone. Don't know, I'm sure the government know what they're doing, all these schemes, but it's having a dramatic effect on the amount of food we grow in this country.
I'm sure the government knows exactly what it's doing. I think he's right about that, but perhaps not in the way that he means. The government absolutely knows what it's doing. The government absolutely understands that the UK is a country that already imports 60% of its food. And as Harry Metcalf there making the point, we're no longer exporting certain types of produce because we're not producing enough of it. As these land management schemes continue to develop, and you remember, I appreciate Debbie's point about change, but Starmer talking about change, in fact, he isn't. He's just accelerating the change which was already in progress. And with respect to farming, that change was the taking of land out of production for food and turning it back into so-called environmental schemes. This is extremely dangerous. And if we think, we began the program by talking about the pressure that people have been under as a result of immigration and the fact that not just immigration, but also the collapse of infrastructure as people have been taking money out of the system hand over fist. This is going to increase pressure even further because inevitably with shortages, prices are going to go up again on a long-term basis. Now, Harry talking about 2025 harvest being when when things sort of become apparent to people. We've been warning about this for how many years now? This has been coming. So nobody should be surprised. Hopefully it can be reversed, but the food production scenario in this country is, Debbie, I would say absolutely insane. I don't know if you've got any thoughts.
Well, I mean, I just go back, to be honest, Mike, we hear all the time about the sustainable development goals. And clearly this is to make everything unsustainable. We are not a sustainable country, and they are deliberately dismantling us. They are deliberately destroying, disrupting in order to create carnage so that we are completely unsustainable. So their sustainable goal is unsustainability, or am I getting it wrong? That's just the way I see it. Everything is inverted. Everything is turned upside down. And with all of the land being reclaimed for solar farms and wind turbines, wind farms as well, it's clear what the agenda is, and that is to destroy any sustainability that this country ever had.
Absolutely. I find it interesting and slightly amusing. You use the word carnage, of course, because Mark Carney is a key figure that's behind all this. When we're talking about we're not just talking about the British government. We're also talking about people that have worked within the British government but are in other roles now. But we're talking about sort of multinational organizations like the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and so on. So there are many players in this game, and we'll be talking more and more about them in the coming days and weeks. Well, look, we've got to leave it there for today. So I'm going to say thank you very much to Debi and Mark for joining us. Thank you all for watching. If you're a UK Column member, stick around on the live stream, and we'll be back in a few minutes for some extra. Otherwise, have a great weekend. I won't see you for another 2 weeks, but the news will continue as usual. See you Monday. Bye-bye.